What's up mga kamawi? Magandang araw sa inyo. Kumusta naman kayong lahat dyan? Kung saan man kayo naroroon, magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Tuloy-tuloy lang po tayo sa ating London tour. Sundan lang po ninyo kasi mayroon tayong part 1, part 2, part 3. Kasi mahaba po yan mga kamawi. Sana sabayan ninyo, lagi nyong panonoodin para makita ninyo kung ano yung kagandahan ng London. At baka naman paki-subscribe naman to yung channel ko at paki-share na rin at paki-pindot na rin sa button bell notification para ma-monetize tayo. At doon naman sa aking mga kasamahan, yung pag-ano namin sa London sa tour, please apologize for delaying the upload for our London trip video because I'm quite busy in my work. My priority is my job, so I have no time to edit because I'm tired already. So sorry. Hopefully this week I can start to upload our video. So don't miss it. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. At sana'y gabayan tayong lahat sa ating Panginoon. Let's go guys. Umpisahan na natin ang ating part 2. Hello mga kamawi. Second din na pala namin to sa pag-tour namin dito sa London. Nandito kami ngayon sa Edinburg, Beverly Hill. What? So sana samahan nyo ako ngayong umaga na to. Papakita ko lang sa inyo yung hotel na tiniranan. Hotel nga ba? Yan o. Yan yan. Ito yung hotel namin. Yun. Tapos kasi dito mayroon din ditong hindi natin pwedeng kunan na may kasama mga puti dahil mayroong iba na gusto nila, yung iba naman ayaw naman, kaya mahirap. Iwasan na lang natin na makakunan sila ng video. Kami, pasensya na kayo, minsan yung iba hindi natin makakunan kasi may mga puti. So kukunan ko ngayon ito yung sasakyan dito, yung bus na sasakyan. Ito yan, yung bus na yan. Ito yung ginamit na sasakyan. So nandito kami ngayon sa Royal Hotel Edinburg City Center. Leonard pala yan. Leonard Hotel. Ayan Leonardo Royal Hotel Edinburg City Center. Samahan nyo ako ngayon pag ano, huwag natin yan pakita yung ilo. Mayroon ditong under construction. Bali na sa center to ng Edinburg, Beverly. So na dito. Tuloy ko mamaya, kukunan ko kayo mamaya, i-ano ko kayo, i-update ko kayo. Samahan lang ninyo ako, basta sumama lang kayo, ano yung pupuntahan namin, papakita ko sa inyo.
I was raised in underdog, but taking it
stop.
After this, Edinburg burned for 5 days straight. Ironically, because we didn't actually get a single spit of rain for those entire 5 days, which is almost unheard of. That's pretty much the height of this building. So what they did was they built all of these houses, albeit flats, sorry, onto the side of it. So that's what kind of hid it away, and that's why when we walked along that first street, you wouldn't even know you were crossing a bridge. If we go down to the bottom here, you'll see the original height, so then you'll see why they had to build all of this onto the side. They then levelled out this street so that it all came level all the way down. Now these streets have been built on top of and worn away, so the streets in Edinburgh are a bit like this, all over the place. This is mainly because they would always try and cover things up after a certain amount of time. Okay, but I'll show you guys the cookie down here. You could actually afford to have almost like a balcony lift. It would come right out over the street and all the way up. Those parts are simply what's left, because obviously after a while they start to decay, no upgrades, no inspection. It's too dangerous to leave it there. And that's why it's then taken back in. So if you notice how small the street would have been, and that came right over, it would have been probably 3 inches away from the other side of the street at that point. Guys, so how many castles do you think are in Edinburgh? What?
4.
4? Very small space. Okay, well there's actually 6.
But actually, even though we come last time, we buy here, but now we buy here. Street
Okay guys. So this year, everyone's just coming a little this one here behind me, it's not owned by the council, but it is a historical building. So it's usually what you'll get is a lot of people, like historians and things, will auction places off. It's kind of like with the underground portion we were just in. That was auctioned off, and then whoever basically paid for it, you got to get so that was that one. Okay, so this here, this is called Paisley Close. Now this was ever rebuilt in the 1860s. So in 1861, this entire tenancy behind me of what was originally here actually finally collapsed. Now this was very, very early hours in the morning. So it happened out of nowhere to everybody. When it collapsed, everyone in the city, including all of our authorities, came rushing over to find out what happened. Now, the tenancy had been built originally in the 1600s, so it had been left for just over 200 years with no checks whatsoever. So, the chair of the building was over 200 years old at this point. Now, mix that with a lot of damp, no upgrades, no checks, no nothing. Eventually, decided to give way. The reason it eventually gave way at this point is actually because the man living in the bottom had decided to take away one of the supporting walls to put in a boiler, and then he took away another supporting wall to put a door through. Now, this left the building with simply 2 or 3 wooden pillars that were over 200 years old and very, very rotten. So the wood had rotted away so much that eventually, from taking away the supports under the building, these pillars didn't actually just snap, they actually shattered from the pressure on them. So the entire thing, once it flowed, just came crashing down. Now there were around 70 people living in the tenement at the time, and around 35 people died. So the people of Edinburgh were absolutely outraged at this. The councils had allowed no regulations to be carried out on this building, and this caused the death of 35 people. Now, out of all the people that were saved, it's quite funny that within the building there was a dog, a cat, and 2 budgies. Before the collapse, they were worth absolutely nothing. After the collapse, they were actually bought by some of the richest people around. Now, after this happened, we decided to commemorate the new building to a young boy who had actually been saved from digging through all the rubble. So after digging through, trying to save as many people as they could, they found a young 14-year-old boy called Joseph. Now they were just about to give up what they were doing. And then eventually they heard a voice. And it said, "There came a woman." And then there are 4 that are hidden around the city. One of them is right there. Yeah. So you can see the little crack in the wall. Within its structure that needs to be classed as a castle back there. Now, if you look up at the very top, you can see the little symbols there. Now, these were actually specifically designed back in its early days. Now, this man is called David Beaton. Now, he was actually a priest in his days. Not a very well liked man at all, mainly because he had a bit of a righteous attitude where he liked to pass judgment on other people and almost scare them straight, I suppose. But he himself was not exactly as clean as he made out. In fact, it was noticed very often that in the middle of the night, usually 2 or 3 times through the night, he would have 2 or 3 visitors, mainly women. Now, priests at this point of his kind were not married. So why there were multiple women coming in and out during the night, especially pushing over from a few brothels, more than likely he was being a little bit naughty on the side. So a lot of people knew this about David Beaton. They knew he wasn't as clean cut as he made out. But they couldn't really question it, because the thing is, in Edinburgh at the time, if you were a high religious figure, or if you were a high political figure, there wasn't a lot you could do about these people if they went a little bit corrupt. Now, at the time of David Beaton being alive and living here, there was actually a big argument going on. Very loud street. There was actually an argument that was going on between 2 families. Now, this was at the time of King James V. Now, as I said before, he was only 17 months old when he became king, right? So, obviously, we can't have a baby running the country. So instead, what we did, oh my goodness, very loud today. So what they did instead was they had the nobles take over the running of Edinburgh until he was old enough to rule for himself. Now, a lot of these noble families did not get on very often, a bit like our politics today, nothing really changes, but they didn't get on and they didn't agree with what they wanted for Edinburgh. So, 2 families, namely the Douglases and the Hamiltons, got so mad with each other that they actually decided to have a battle between the families. Whoever lost would have to leave Edinburgh and they would no longer be a part of running it. So, the Hamiltons lived just outside Edinburgh and they actually travelled into Edinburgh with around 300 men. The Douglases were living in the very top house up there, which I can show you guys as we go past. The very top of this hill, the Douglases and their whole family, again around 300 men, all ready to fight each other. Now at this point, as I said, the streets have changed quite a lot. Back then, only this wide as this pathway. You can imagine 300 men all geared up in with armour at the bottom of this hill, trying to come up. And the Douglases had 300 odds of their men, all armoured up, coming down the hill on a path as wide as this. It gets a bit crowded. So, while they're trying to squeeze their way up to fight each other, you actually had people living on the street who were actually siding with one of the families. And what would happen is they would reach out to you from their windows, grab you, and ask you which family it is that you are fighting for. If you said the right name, then what they would do is they'd reach behind you and they'd pass you out some more arms to use against the other family. However, if you said the wrong name, they would still reach behind them for some arms, but they would kill you on the spot as a favour to the other side. Now, eventually, the Douglases won. Personally, my theory is more than likely because they were the ones coming down the hill. You can imagine trying to carry heavy armour and fight going up the hill in such a tiny space. But after this battle, the Hamiltons were then forced to leave Edinburgh. The Douglases took charge of everything that was going on. Look at this. Of course! I swear, they do this every time we come down to this spot. I swear, they're planning this. They're planning this. Okay, so we're going to head up the hill now, okay? Don't worry, this is the only hill I will have you go up. The rest is all downhill, I promise. Okay? And a lot of the time, these meetings actually wouldn't take place up at the castle or down at Holyrood Palace for fear of spies who could be listening into these conversations. So a lot of the time the monarch would actually disguise himself as a regular person, come out into the city and meet the Lord Provost in his own home. Now with the date of this fireplace and the fact that a lot of the monarchs used to do this, you could well be standing in the room of where King James I of England and VI of Scotland could have visited quite a few times. Now, King James I and VI was particularly paranoid about one specific thing. Scarcity, which is why this side's a little bit more modern. Once they found this, they had to stop what they were doing because they realised they just came across something that no one actually knew about. Now this was in the 1990s that we discovered this. After finding this, we then started to go through this wall where we found this archway, which leads out into the street. Now, we actually nicknamed this room the King's Room. There's a very good reason for this. This fireplace behind me is so big, it is far too extravagant to have belonged to one of the poorer people that used to live on this street. Now, the king didn't live here, but the reason we call it the King's Room is because what we do know is that the Lord Provost at the time, so kind of like your local councillor, your local mayor, things like that, your Lord Provost actually lived on this street before. Now, putting that information together with the size of this fireplace, it's pretty obvious to us that this could have been a file to process a photograph. So they would have them just sit like that. Usually, more than likely, behind her is a little wooden stick as well that almost holds them, props them up. So, just to remember them. Yeah, just for family history sort of things to remember them.
Because if they are alive, you cannot dress them like that.
When was this taken? 18.
So that would have been the sort of mid-1800s, 1850s probably. But yeah, but that's all we really know about her, is that it would have been roughly the 1850s, and her name was Emily. But that was...
She's famous?
Not famous, it's just been it would have been the daughter of someone, yeah, but especially with the clothing she's wearing, most likely a wealthy family. But that's as much, unfortunately, a lot of the time in our history, when it comes to children, it's very limited what you can actually find out about them, unless they are in a really, really wealthy family or a monarchy, things like that. What we find out about children is quite limited. It's usually on a first name basis, or even no first name, it could just be they belong to this family. So, yes, but that is a real girl. Anything at this point in time. If you were a woman especially, if you were speaking a little bit out of turn, maybe where it wasn't your place, you could be accused. If maybe you were too good with herbs, if you were very good at healing people, so if you were a nurse or a midwife, it simply could be something as simple as that. If anybody grew suspicious of you, you were too good at your job, that was you basically. Now, what they would actually do is once you'd been accused, they would arrest you and take you possibly to the Lord Provost's home, or to one of the castles, or possibly to the prison, but very unlikely to actually be in the prison because they were already stuffed full as it is. So, a lot of our prisons in Edinburgh would be built to house only around 800 to 1,000 prisoners at a time. Most of them could be holding up to 2,000 at any given time. So not the best place to interrogate someone. So they would possibly bring them to places like this, where they would actually strip them of their clothing and tie them up to a chair. They would then take what looked like a little knife, almost looks like a very, very thin, almost like a needle. And they would actually start to pierce it all over your body. Now, the reason they did this is because they were trying to find what they called a devil's mark. They believed that the devil's mark was a part of your body where you wouldn't feel any pain. And this is because they said that you had been touched in that specific area by the devil himself when you were to do his work and things like this. So, they would do this all over your body. You would be bleeding everywhere, basically. Eventually, the adrenaline would get so high in your body from this pain that your body would most likely, from the adrenaline, just block it out. And that's how they found their devil's mark. After this, if they find their devil's mark, and sometimes if they didn't, if they were adamant that you were guilty, a lot of the time then what they would do is they would take your thumbs, they would cross over your arms, and they would tie your thumbs to your toes. They would then take you down to what we call the Norloch, or the North Lake, which is just on the other side of Edinburgh, and I can show you guys that on the map once we go through that room. Now, they would actually throw you in to the water. If you sank and you drowned, you were innocent, so a big mistake on their part. If you floated, you would be accused again. This is proof that you're now a witch. And you didn't have much luck either this way, because you would just be taken up to Castle Hill, just outside Edinburgh Castle, where you would be strangled and burned. So, not much luck if you were accused of witchcraft. You could die by drowning or burning. It really just depended on the situation. However, this was the biggest thing that King James I and VI was paranoid about, and more than likely would have had some of these conversations in this room, possibly even a couple of interrogations as well. Now, figure out where they are, so we don't bump into them.
Are you sure that's them? Are you sure that's them?
I thought it's King James 6.
Okay, guys, if you want to come through this way. There's one right over there as well. See it here? One right over. Now, these were actually originally vaults as well. We are going to go into the one that we've been able to open. Now, these vaults were built under the 19 arches of the South Bridge. If you could imagine, within each arch you had 4 or 5 vaults built in on top of each other. Now the one that we're going to go into was more than likely one of the top ones, and they were built for a very specific reason. Once the bridge was completed, it was actually used for a marketplace on the very top. Underneath, the vaults were put in place as storage spaces for these businesses. However, it didn't last very long this way, namely because the council actually decided to be very, very cheap in building it. So they actually got really bad quality rock from local quarries and sandstone. Now sandstone is very porous, so it's not waterproof. So the water basically just comes straight through, which is why you'll see yourself here, a lot of water does drip straight through. Now this water above you is probably about 4 or 5 days old. So, but don't worry, nobody ever has gotten sick from it dropping down on them. So please don't worry about that. But if you do feel a drip on your head, it's just from coming through. Now we're going to go into the vault. It is a bit of a tight space, and there are some dolls. That's mainly just for the ghost tours. But there are some dolls. If you want to go in and gather in a little circle as far back as we can, just so we can get a little space in the middle. All right? East 1778. The flooring here is all original, so this would have been 1650s. Over to that wall, which would be 1650s, and then this above your head was then built over the street, and that would be the 1850s that was built over, because they tried to cover it up. Okay?
Let's go. Look at all the dolls. It looks so pretty.
Yeah, you see it all dripping through, yeah.
The dolls look so cute.
If you guys want to stay there, that's fine. It's too tight of a space for you. Okay? Okay. Now, this, what you're standing in, is one of the original 126 vaults that went along the South Bridge. Now, as I said before, they were originally built for businesses. However, they only lasted this way for about 10 years. Namely because with the damp conditions down here and how filthy it was, if you were storing things like food down here, now the streets were also at this point, they would have been absolutely filthy. Now this is partially from things like mud, but also along with that, you would have had feces in the streets as well. And this is because partially animals, but also we had a law in Scotland that basically after 10 o'clock at night and before 7 AM in the morning, also because we didn't have any indoor plumbing, we would have to rely on a bucket in the corner of a room. So after this time at night, you could then throw the contents of the bucket out your window and onto the street. So if you can imagine ankle deep filth, feces, dead animals, blood from the local butchers, all that kind of thing. Now that would be coming through with the water from the rain. So again, if you can imagine storing things like food down here, that wasn't really a great idea. So after only 10 years, the businesses had had enough and they moved out. After that, a lot of crime then started to move in, as what typically happens when you have abandoned spaces. So down here you had a lot of thieves, you had murderers, you had brothels, you had illegal gambling and illegal distilleries as well, so quite a few explosions as well. On top of that, within all this crime that was happening down here, you also would have actually had a lot of people who came down from the north of Scotland. So after the Highland clearances, a lot of them were homeless and they came to Edinburgh seeking a new life. Now the thing about Edinburgh is you had to pay a toll to get in and out of the city. So a lot of these people would come down with just enough money to pay the toll to get into the city, but then they would not find any work. Now this was partly due to the fact that in Edinburgh there was a lot of discrimination at the time. If you weren't from Edinburgh, you were put to the back of the line. And this happened a lot to the Irish people that were coming over during the potato famines as well. So they would come to Edinburgh with whatever money they had, they would pay the toll to get in, and then unfortunately they would actually end up trapped because you also had to pay to get back out of Edinburgh. If they couldn't find work, you couldn't earn money, and they'd be stuck here. And if they were homeless, they would seek shelter in places like this. Now, it lasted for quite a long time, and actually there's a part of the underground city, there's a lot of other streets that have been discovered as well. There's a part that's actually named Damnation Alley. Now this is mainly because it was nicknamed so because if you went into it, it was highly unlikely you were coming back out of it, because the crime was that bad. To come out with your life was quite an achievement. Now, with regards to the dolls, they're pretty much just here for the ghost tours. However, there are two that have been seen to move quite a few times. When we first opened this vault, we found a lot of signs of life. So we found little wooden toys, we found some broken medicine bottles, we found things like old shoes, horseshoes, lots and lots of signs of everyday life. So that's how we really know that after these businesses left, people were definitely living in here. Now we've done a couple of paranormal investigations in here. They have found a couple of things. Namely, the first doll that was put in here was sat in the middle of the vault. And then when we came back the next morning, it had moved quite a few inches across the floor on its own. Which is why a lot of the time tourists sometimes feel sorry for the children or the spirits of children that could be left in here. And so they just come and leave a little doll. And they seem to be quite attached to two of them mainly. So. Now, another thing that they used to do in these vaults is they actually sometimes used to embed seashells in the walls, especially in the doorways. Now, the reason for that is because with the fear of witchcraft at the time, people believed that anything that had come into contact with salt and water, a witch couldn't pass that. So a lot of people would embed these seashells in their doorways to keep witches at bay, pretty much. Now, finally, just before the vaults were covered up in the 1830s, there was actually the Great Fire of Edinburgh. So it was in 1834 that happened. Now, if you bear in mind, this place was covered up and completely finished in the 1850s, so just under 20 years later. Now, the reason they actually decided to finally complete covering up this street was because something tragic happened to a lot of people. During the Great Fire of Edinburgh, a lot of people tried to seek shelter in places like this, thinking with the damp, it would keep the flames away. However, a lot of these vaults were actually built with little passageways to filter the air through. So a lot of this smoke became really condensed, and it came into these vaults where they had usually barricaded themselves in to try and keep the fire out. Now, if you didn't die of asphyxiation first, the problem then for the poor souls that were left to the end was that these vaults, because of how they're built, would reach temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius.
So what?
So it basically just became a big oven, and they were baked alive, pretty much. Now, after this happened, to stop any chance of this kind of thing happening again, that's when they finally decided enough's enough, we're going to have to cover these up. So that's what they did. We managed to burrow our way into this one, and luckily it's still in good enough condition that we can get in. This here is the original flooring as well, underneath your feet. The other ones, unfortunately, they have been packed in so tight that we can't get into them, but as you can see, the archway is just along there as well. You can see them there. Okay. So you're free to take as many pictures and videos in here as you want, and then we'll head out and let the other group in. Okay.
Paranormal activity. Conjuring.
Yeah, so they were originally just completely built for the businesses that would have been on the bridge, and then after that, because of the conditions, they just decided to leave all the stuff, and then there was a lot of dodgy things going on after that. Okay, guys, so if we can have everyone just look at this map on the wall for me. Now, this map here is a map of Edinburgh. It's a 16th century map of how Edinburgh used to look. Now, does it look like anything in particular to you? Something maybe, some kind of animal, possibly?
Blue whale.
A whale.
Well.
Whale.
It's like a big fish, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is quite ironic that Edinburgh. He does the most tours as well. He likes that some spooky stories. Yeah, so it looks a bit like a big fish. So you've got the head here, all the spines, the fins, and then the tail here. Now, this is quite ironic, as I said, and this is because with all the filth that was in the streets, along with the fact that we relied a lot on coal fires and things like that, Edinburgh was absolutely stinking. It was really, really smelly, to the point that people actually said you could
You're
smell
finishing already,
Edinburgh
right?
before you saw it.
I come here the one day.
So people used to say that you could actually smell Edinburgh before you saw it. And that's how Edinburgh got its nickname Old Reeky, which basically means old smelly. Now if you look at the difference between both sides, this here was just Edinburgh. Canongate was an entirely separate borough, or a separate town altogether. And this right here is where you had the toll booth to get in and out. Now this stretched a mile down. Now it's a Scottish mile. Does anyone know the difference between a normal mile and a Scottish mile?
No.
This is a little bit to do with the fact that we just wanted to be a bit different from the English.
Interesting.
So a Scottish mile is actually 1 mile and 1/8.
Huh? One mile in one?
So it's 1 mile and 1/8 of a mile.
Oh.
So instead of just a normal mile, we added that little bit extra because we didn't want to be the same as the English. That goes to show the relationship we had. Now, these houses here, you can see, are much more tightly packed in. These ones are much more spaced out. Wealthier people lived here, poorer people were in here. Now, the reason they're so packed in like this, though,